Thank you for watching me on YouTube. As always, I present myself as an honest, unapologetic voice out there for those who are willing to listen. I usually talk about issues facing my community, the government, and of course the corrupt mainstream media.
Republican presidential debate.
That is your distinguishing idea, distinguishment from all of the others on this stage, about how to create jobs in this country, how to bring jobs back from overseas, and if you will, how many jobs do you think you can create, and how long will that take? And Speaker Gingrich, will you lead us off?
Well, I think that there's a clear record. I worked with Ronald Reagan in the early 80s. His recovery program translated into today's population will be about 25 million new jobs in a 7-year period. As Speaker of the House, I worked with President Clinton and following a very similar plan, and we ended up with about 11 million new jobs in a 4-year period. Went down to 4.2% unemployment. Starts very simply. Taxes, lower taxes, less regulation, an American energy plan, and actually be positive about people who create jobs.
Well, having spent my life in the private sector, I understand where jobs are created. They're not created in government. They're not created in Washington. They're created on main streets and streets all over America. And to help make America the most attractive place in the world for investment, for new enterprise, for entrepreneurs, and for job growth, there's 7 things you have to do. There's not just one, there's 7. 1, make sure that our employer tax rates are competitive with other nations. They're not now. We're the highest in the world. Number 2, get regulators and regulations to recognize their job is not to burden the private enterprise system, but to encourage it. Number 3, to have trade policies that make sense for America, not just for the people with whom we trade. This president has not done that, and China, that's been cheating, has to be cracked down on. Number 4, we have to have energy policies that take advantage of our extraordinary energy resources. Number 5, the rule of law, and the Boeing effort on the part of the NLRB violated that. Number 6, great institutions to create human capital. And number 7, finally, a government that doesn't spend more money than it takes in.
I emphasize the fact that you have to know why we have a recession, why we have unemployment before you can solve the problem. And the financial bubbles are created by excessive credit and stimulation by the Federal Reserve. And then you have bubbles and you have to have a correction. This stimulus creates excessive debt and malinvestment. As long as you don't correct that and you maintain the debt and the malinvestment, you can't get back to economic growth again. Unfortunately, so far, what we have done is we have not liquidated the debt. We have dumped the debt on the American people through TARP funding and as well as the Federal Reserve. So the debt is dumped on the people, and what did we do? We bailed out the people that were benefiting during the formation of the bubble.
Mark is a tax policy that puts a flat tax in place of 20%. And you, as they've said, you get rid of the regulatory burden that's killing people. And I have a record of doing that as the governor of the state of Texas over the last 11 years. We created over 1 million jobs in that state, while America lost over 2 million jobs. So there's a very clear blueprint of how to make this work. But I want to talk about one other issue, and Congressman Paul touched on it. And it's this idea, I can on a map diagram the problem that we've got in America today, and it's this direct line between Washington, D.C. and Wall Street. And it's the corruption that's gone on. It's the idea of TARP. It's the idea of $7.7 trillion that we didn't even know was being put into these people's and these banks' That's what Americans are really upset with.
We can do that is first addressing the tax code. I'm a former federal tax lawyer, and that literally we will create millions of dollars if we abolish the tax code and embrace a pro-growth policy, not only by lowering the rate for businesses, but by individuals as well, and making it a tax code that applies fairly and the same to all Americans. That's very important. And something else I want to do with my tax code policy is make sure that everyone pays something, because today 47% of the American people pay nothing in federal income tax. Everyone benefits by the country they need to pay. One of my competitors was Herman Cain, and he always reminded us of the 999 plan. And what I would like to do is have the win-win-win plan.
21% of the people employed in this country in manufacturing, it's now 9%. And it hurts disproportionately small town and rural America. So what I learned from traveling around Iowa is we had to get a plan together to revitalize manufacturing. So I took the corporate tax not to 12%, I zeroed it out for all manufacturers. We want manufacturing, we want Made in the USA to be the moniker under my administration. We want to put a platform together that's going to repeal regulations that are crushing our manufacturers and businesses. I'll repeal. One thing a president can do, he can't pass a law, but he can repeal regulations. And Barack Obama has given us a bevy of regulations that need to be repealed, starting with a lot of our energy regulations that are driving up our energy costs. That's another part of the plan, is to make sure we have lower electricity rates, that we have oil and gas drilling going on here so manufacturing can afford to be here. You put together that plan, we will get not only revitalize the economy, we'll take care of an area of this country that has suffered in recent times, and that's rural and small town America.
Two big questions through this nomination fight. Who is the most consistent conservative candidate among you, and which of you is best able to defeat President Obama? Governor Romney, Speaker Gingrich crystallized his argument a couple of weeks ago. He said, and I quote, "I'm a lot more conservative than Mitt Romney and a lot more electable than anyone else." I know you don't agree with that. Why?
Well, of course I don't agree. In a merit-based society, I believe in the principles that made America the greatest nation on earth. And Speaker Gingrich and I have a lot of places where we disagree. We'll talk about those. Places where we disagree. Let's see. We could start with his idea to have a lunar colony that would mine minerals from the moon. I'm not in favor of spending that kind of money to do that. He said that he would like to eliminate, in some cases, the child labor laws so that kids could clean schools. I don't agree with that idea. His plan in capital gains, to remove capital gains for people at the very highest level of income, is different than mine. I'd eliminate capital gains, interest, and dividends for people in middle income. So we have differences of viewpoint on some issues.
Okay. Let's start with the last one. Let's be candid. The only reason you didn't become a career politician is you lost to Teddy Kennedy in 1994.
Now wait a second. Now wait a second.
Do I get to continue?
Please.
No, and I'm just saying, I looked at it, I thought, I'm a citizen, I've served the country in many ways, you're a citizen, you served the country in many ways, but it's a bit much. You'd have been a 17-year career politician by now.
I want to bring Congressman Paul in on this because, Congressman, you've been running ads that are quite tough. Quite tough on Speaker Gingrich here in Iowa this week, accusing him of, quote, and this is a quote from your ad, serial hypocrisy. Why do you think Speaker Gingrich is a hypocrite?
He supported the TARP funds, and the other thing that really should have annoyed a lot of people, he received a lot of money from Freddie Mac. And Freddie Mac is essentially a government organization. While he was earning a lot of money from Freddie Mac, I was fighting over a decade to try to explain to people where the housing bubble was coming from. So Freddie Mac is bailed out by the taxpayer. So the way, Newt, I think you probably got some of our taxpayers' money. They got taxed, they got money on, they're still getting bailed out. But you were a spokesman for them, and you received money for them. So I think this is something that the people ought to know about. But there's been many positions, and you have admitted many of the positions where you have changed positions. But if you were looking for a consistent position, I think there's be a little bit of trouble anybody competing with me on consistency.
Normally in your own speeches, the housing bubble came from the Federal Reserve inflating the money supply. Now that's the core of the housing bubble. And I happen to be with you on auditing the Fed and frankly on firing Bernanke. Second, I was never a spokesman for any agency. I never did any lobbying for any agency. I offered strategic advice.
This campaign, and that is values, family, and faith. Governor Romney and Governor Perot, you both made it a feature of ads you ran in Iowa this week, which leads to this question from our partners at the Des Moines Register, and I'm going to show it up on the screen. Should voters consider marital fidelity when making their choices for president? And Governor Perry, in South Carolina this week, you said this is an important issue. Why?
Well, I said that not only did I make a vow to my wife, but I made a vow to God. And that's pretty heavy lifting in my book. When I make a vow to God, then I would suggest to you that's even stronger than a handshake in Texas.
The question is about its relevance to the presidential race. So let me just follow up quickly. Do you think a candidate who breaks his marital vows is more likely to break faith with voters?
Well, you know, I think the voters are wise enough to figure that one out. I've always kind of been of the opinion that if you cheat on your wife, you'll cheat on your business partner. So I think that issue of fidelity is important. I mean, it's a characteristic of which people look at individuals, whether it's in their business lives or whether it's in their personal lives or whether it's picking someone to serve in public office. Individuals who have been in fidelity with their spouse, I think that sends a very powerful message. If you will cheat on your wife, if you will cheat on your spouse, then why wouldn't you cheat on your business partner? Or why wouldn't you cheat on anybody?
Because you made similar accusations against Speaker Gingrich. You called him the poster boy of crony capitalism. Did he answer your concerns?
Well, when you're talking about taking over $100 million and when your office is on the Rodeo Drive of Washington, D.C., which is K Street, and you're taking money to influence the outcome of legislation in Washington, that's the epitome of the establishment. That's the epitome of a consummate insider. But your question was, who's the proven constitutional conservative in this race? And that would be me. You have to take a look at the candidates that are on the stage. You started out with Mitt Romney and with Newt Gingrich asking them about whether or not they're the conservative in this race, but you have to take a look. When you look at Newt Gingrich, for 20 years, he's been advocating for the individual mandate in health care. That's longer than Barack Obama. Or if you look at Mitt Romney as the governor of Massachusetts, he's the only governor that put into place socialized medicine. No other governor did. Our nominee has to stand on the stage and debate Barack Obama and be completely different. At Newt Romney, they were for Obamacare principles. If you look at Newt Romney, they were for cap and trade. If you look at Newt Romney, they were for the illegal immigration problem. And if you look at Newt Romney, they were for the $700 billion bailout. And you just heard Newt Romney is also with Obama on the issue of the payroll extension. So if you want a difference, Michelle Bachmann is the proven conservative. It's not Newt Romney.
There's a lot out there. So let's get both gentlemen a chance to respond. Speaker Gingrich, you go first because you're involved twice also on the lobbying, and then Governor Romney. Right, go ahead.
Well, Michelle, a lot of what you say just isn't true. Period. I opposed cap and trade. I testified against it the same day that Al Gore testified for it. I helped defeat it in the Senate through American Solutions. It is simply untrue. I fought against Obamacare at every step of the way. I did. The Center for Health Transformation was actively opposed. We actively campaigned against it. I think it's important for you, and this is a fair game, and everybody gets to pick fights. It's important that you be accurate when you say these things. Those are not true. And most of the money I made, frankly, I made in ways that are totally and had nothing to do with anything you've described. I did no lobbying, no representation. And frankly, my speech money and other things I did that had nothing to do with that was a lot larger source of income.
We can look at his record, we can look at my record, but really this is more about us talking about what we believe. And whether we can lead the country at a time when we need to restore the kind of values that make America the greatest nation on earth.
I think character issues do count, and I think all of your record, personal as well as political record, is there for the public to look at. I would not say it's a disqualifier. I wouldn't go that far. I think people make mistakes, and you are held accountable to those mistakes, and the public can listen to the circumstances and make their decision. But certainly it's a factor, and it should be a factor. I think it should be necessary to have to talk about it. I think it should show through in the way we live, and I think it should show through in your marriage, and I happen to have been married for 54 years and a family person, but I don't think we should have to talk about it. But you know what probably is every bit as important. If your marriage vows are important, what about our oath of office? That's what really gets to me. That's where you're really on the line as a public figure. And that's where I think a lot of people come up real short, because there's many times that I've been forced to Congress because I take my oath very seriously. I end up sometimes, believe it or not, voting all by myself, thinking that why aren't they people paying attention? Why don't they read Article 1, Section 8? You know, if we took that oath of office seriously in Washington, we'd get rid of 80% of the government. The budget would be balanced. We'd have sound money, and we would have prosperity, and we wouldn't be the policemen of the world. We wouldn't have a Federal Reserve System, and we wouldn't be invading the privacy of every single individual in this country with bills like the Patriot Act. We'd have a free society and a prosperous society.
Speaker Gingrich caused something of a stir overnight in the Middle East with comments he made in an interview with the Jewish channel in which he called the Palestinians an invented people. Said, mark my words, these statements of Gingrich will be the ammunition and weapons of the Bin Ladens and the extremists for a long, long time.
How would he know the difference?
If Bibi Netanyahu wants to say what you said, let him say it. But our ally, the people of Israel, should be able to take their own positions and not have us negotiate for them.
I want to turn, if I can, to...
Can I just say one last thing? Because I didn't speak for the people of Israel. I spoke as a historian who has looked at the world stage for a very long time. I've known Bibi since 1984. I feel quite confident an amazing number of Israelis found it nice to have an American tell the truth about the war they're in the middle of and the casualties they're taking and the people who surround them who say you do not have the right to exist and we want to destroy you.
And I believe in a non-interventionist foreign policy. I don't think we should get in the middle of these squabbles, but to go out of our way to say that so-and-so is not a real people. Technically and historically, yes, under the Ottoman Empire, the Palestinians didn't have a state, but neither did Israel have a state then, too. But this is how we get involved in so many messes, and I think it just fails on the side of practicing a little bit of diplomacy, getting ourselves into trouble, mentioning things that are unnecessary. The people in those regions should be dealing with these problems. We shouldn't be dealing with these things, but historically, under the Ottoman Empire, that is technically correct. But to make these decisions and deciding what the settlement is going to be should be the people that are involved. This idea that we can be the policemen of the world and settle all these disputes, I mean, soon we'll have to quit because we're flat-out broke, but we cannot continue to get into these issues like this and getting ourselves into more trouble.
Founders spoke about this, and the question was asked, what is it that we need to have in a president? And they wrote in the Federalist Papers, they didn't look at wealth, they didn't look at education, they didn't look at position. They looked at just one issue, and it was, what's the measure of the man, or what's the measure of the woman, in our case, for being the next president of the United States? Will they keep their word? Will they be a man or woman of integrity? That's what they cared about. That was more important than anything else. And I think here in Iowa, that's what I've seen. That is also what people care about. Who are you really? What is your center? What's your core? What's your worldview? What drives you? And so people want to know, what's your faith? I'm a Christian. I'm unashamed and unapologetic about that.
To turn now, if we can, to the issue of immigration.
Let me address the issue that you asked from the start, and obviously securing that border is the key, and any of these conversations that we're having now are nothing more than intellectual discussions until you secure that. I read your first book, and it said in there that your mandate in Massachusetts, which should be the model for the country. And I know it came out of the reprint of the book, but I'm just saying, you were for individual mandates, my friend.
You know what? You've raised that before, Rick, and you're certainly wrong.
It was true then.
No.
It's true now.
Rick, I'll tell you what. $10,000? $10,000 bet?
I'm not in the betting business, but
okay.
I'll show you the. I'll show you the book.
I've got the book, and
we'll show you.
Does this question evoke? How much does it matter to have personal experience?
Well, I feel very fortunate because although I was raised in a system, in a family that was rather poor, I didn't even know it. It was during the Depression, World War II, and we didn't have very much, and I worked my way through college, and that was a natural instinct because that's what you were supposed to do. Characteristic about monetary policy, when a country destroys its currency, it transfers wealth from the middle class to the wealthy. And this is what you're seeing today, the elimination of the middle class, and it's going to get a lot worse unless we address the subject overspending, overborrowing, and printing too much money and understanding the business cycle.
Who's got the better of the argument?
Well, I think you have to speak the truth, but you have to do so with prudence. I mean, it's a combination. I sat there and I listened to both of them. I thought they both had made excellent points, but we're in a real life situation. This isn't an academic exercise. We have an ally. And the policy of this country should be to stand shoulder to shoulder with our ally. And we didn't have an ally in the Soviet Union. The only allies we had were sitting in gulags. And they desperately needed to hear the truth. And Ronald Reagan provided that truth. So but here we have the truth with prudence. Would that be saying falsehoods are invented or not? If I can finish my comment, I'll get to that. Unfortunately, in America, we see the family continuing to break down. And with that, the economic status of those families. Single-parent households in America now have poverty levels approaching 40%. So you not only have the lack of security and stability in so many cases because moms are doing heroic work trying to hold things together, but it's hard. And so what we can do as a federal government, we can do more importantly as a leader of this country, is to try to promote this institution of marriage, try to promote the family, and try to nurture this environment that we have to make sure that families are elevated and supported, and fathers and mothers are there to take care of their families and be there for their children. That's the most important luxury. Who's the better of this argument?
Who has the better of this argument? We honestly believe that two men who just stood on this stage and defended Romney Care when it was put in place in Massachusetts and the individual mandate when he proposed it in 1993, are they honestly going to get rid of it in 2012? Yes. This is going to be a very... I don't think so. It's going to be a very heavy lift.
To learn to do better on at a young age. They talked about obesity, they talked about exercise. If I can ask you, Congressman Paul, anything government should do on these fronts?
On medical?
On these fronts, specifically of healthy behavior at very young ages.
No, essentially not, but they have to be a referee. If people are doing things that hurt other people, yes. But if you embark on instituting a society where government protects you from yourself, you're in big trouble.
I always find the principle of leadership to be most interesting. And as I look at the people on the stage, each exhibits different qualities of leadership, and they've each exercised leadership in different ways. One of the things about Ron Paul that always amazes me is when I come to a debate like this, the only signs I see are the Ron Paul people out there freezing.